Hello, everyone. Welcome. We'll take a minute as everybody's sort of still making their way into the Zoom, but welcome, welcome, welcome to our latest Lunch and Learn. My name is Basil Smikle, Director of the Nonprofit Management Program, and to Andy and Lonnie, who have been so fantastic at making this happen month to month. Again, my thanks, our thanks as a program to the both of you. Our guest today is Kimberly A. McCall. Maybe she'll tell us what the A stands for. But we're going to take a minute and just keep allowing folks to filter in. We have the chat open for a short period of time. If anyone cares to tell us where they're zooming in from, we'd love to know. I, for one, am here in New York City in Washington Heights, just pretty close to Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. I guess it's called New York Presbyterian now. But please, let us know where you're zooming in from. We'd love to know where you're at. And again, welcome, welcome, welcome. We'll get started as soon as we get more people into our room here. And our chat is temporarily open, so please let us know where you're zooming in from. The Archdiocese of New York, Anne-Marie, thank you for coming, for joining us today. I am a proud Catholic school kid, 1st through 12th grade, St. Mary's, which is sadly now closed in the Bronx, and Mount St. Michael Academy, which is thankfully still open. Kimberly at the Groton School, my goddaughter goes there, Sage Graves. Please tell her I said hello. Carrollton, Georgia, hello. Brooklyn, New York, hello. All right, well, let's get started. Did I see a Los Angeles out there? Look at that. All the way on the West Coast. Thank you for joining us. Again, thanks everybody for coming to our monthly Lunch and Learn. Again, for those that just joined us, my name is Basil Smikle. I'm the Director of the Nonprofit Management Program. Lonnie and Andy are behind the scenes and work on this month to month, among other things in profit management. So thank you so much for the support you give to the program. This month's Lunch and Learn, and I'm really thankful to have the opportunity to speak to one of our wonderful faculty members, Kimberly A. McCall. I've tried to get her to tell us what the A stands for.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me, Basil. And I love seeing all these comments coming in. Great to be here. I'm coming from Chelsea this morning. I would say that I'm a New Yorker on the outside, but I'm a California girl at heart. I'm from Southern California originally, but my 20 years in New York, I think, have earned me the
Listen, I always tell people, if you've jaywalked in New York City, if you've been on the subway more than a few times, I used to say if you walked between cars on the subway, but I know people feel really skittish about that, but that's something that I used to do all the time. But there's certain things that just make you a New Yorker, you just become that by your day to day. So to that point, Kimberly is one of our really fantastic faculty members in the program. Based on what she does in her life outside of Columbia, I really wanted to give her a platform today to talk about her work in given everything that's going on in some corners of the world and certainly here in our country. But Kim, I'm a big fan of the Actors Studio, so I love the way they do the interviews there. So to quote the host, I'm going to begin at the beginning. Where are you from?
Yeah, so I grew up in Southern California, and I just have to pause as you were introducing me. I'm like, what a time to be alive. What a time to have this conversation. And I'm glad that, that we had this on the books, because there's never been a moment that I've lived through that's felt quite like this. And I'm excited to chat about this. But yeah, so from Southern California, I did my undergrad work at a small liberal arts school called Chapman University. And then what brought me out to the East Coast was actually my graduate work at Georgetown in public policy many, many, many decades ago. But continuing on that path. And then, as you know, I just recently finished up my PhD last year, actually, in global leadership and change from Pepperdine University. So I've kind of straddled back and forth on the coasts. And one experience that was, I really had the opportunity during my studies there to dive deep into how student engagement impacts graduation rates. I ran a study in New York City public schools and
Oh, wow.
yeah, really looked at like how to close opportunity gaps, how systems can either set young people up for success or let them fall through the cracks. And, let's be real, like sometimes those cracks are giant, giant gaps for just too many kids.
Sure,
So
sure.
that was just like a fantastic experience. My dissertation was called Beyond the Classroom. Wait, let me look and make sure I get it right. It's a while ago. Uh, Beyond the Classroom, Unraveling the Impact of Student Engagement on Graduation Rates in New York City. So really looking at student experiences, both inside and outside the classroom, but beyond the actual kind of academic syllabus of a course. So
Mm,
how do mentorship, extracurriculars, social and emotional learning, peer connections, both physical and emotional safety within a school building all play a role in whether students graduate. And then
mm,
I also looked at a lot of the structural inequities as well, why certain students are set up to thrive, whether that's gender or race or income, and while others are kind of fighting an uphill battle. So it was really a fascinating experience, and learned a lot from that process that I've also been able to bring into the classroom at Columbia.
what inspired you to research that?
Yeah, I'd been spending some years working in and around public schools, specifically, helping kids kind of get along better and work on those social and emotional skills that
Mm,
I think we were failing at for a couple of decades as students and children were getting more and more tethered to screens. And so, I originally was really interested in like how we help students build interpersonal relationships and things of that nature. But then just started to spend so much time in schools and seeing how having a constant caring adult could really impact how a student plugged into school. And so really wanted to kind of like unpack that further.
that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Now, let's go back to, I know you talked about the time between Georgetown and Pepperdine, but so have you always been in nonprofit work? What was like your first nonprofit kind of
Yeah,
experience and then job?
sure. Oh my gosh, we have to back up even further.
Okay.
Um, it all started with a box of Thin Mint Girl Scout cookies.
Well, I'm a trefoil person myself, so
Okay.
definitely.
Shortbreads are your jam. I got it. I got it. Uh, so yeah, I think I was 9 years old. I was a brownie in Girl Scouts, and I was that kid knocking on doors, making my pitch, and convincing people that they needed another box, whether it was trefoils or Samoyas, or I think the tagalongs were those the peanut butter cookies.
Mm, mm,
But what I didn't realize was that, I wasn't just selling cookies. I was really learning how to rally people around a cause. And
mm,
I got hooked. I got hooked. And
yeah,
here I am,
yeah.
30 plus years later. So that was really my first taste of raising money to do something good. And I haven't really stopped since then.
Yeah.
So if you fast forward a few decades, and that early spark, 30 years later has turned into a very long career in nonprofit leadership, everything from, scaling organizations to raising millions and millions of dollars to fighting for children and communities in crisis. And so I started my career largely in advocacy, a little bit of humanitarian work, youth development. I was at Coalition for the Homeless here in New York City for a while. I also spent a number of years in the health side of the sector as a very early career professional at American Cancer Society and American Heart Association.
Mm,
And through all those roles, I think I really learned that money, how it's raised, how it's spent by organizations, who controls it, can really determine how and whether good ideas actually happen. And so I realized that if I really wanted to make an impact, I had to get good at fundraising and strategy and leadership. And so I did. And over the years have helped kind of grow and transform organizations, making sure that they have the funding and the strategy and the leadership to actually deliver on their missions. And so some of my bigger roles, I was at an organization called Playworks, the executive director for a number of years, and I took that organization, which focuses on transforming school recess into almost
mm,
another classroom.
right.
And helping scale and grow to 250 schools in the Northeast while like quadrupling our budget in order to do that work. Um, Great experience. At Happy Hearts Fund, I spent some time initially in international development before I, had now ended up back there and worked to expand fundraising across a variety of different countries impacted by natural disasters everywhere from Haiti to Indonesia to Thailand
Mm,
to Peru and Mexico. So some really incredible experience working on multilateral partnerships. We were rebuilding schools specifically, and so looking at sustainability in that process, a lot of community planning and engagement and involvement. And so another just like robust and diverse experience to kind of add to my toolkit as I was building my skill set. And so um, from there, I then ran a group called KESM, which is a national network of university chapters that run summer camps for kids impacted by a
mm.
parent's cancer.
Oh, wow.
So I ran about 135 university chapters. A big portion of my time was spent on the youth leadership development piece. Huge budget, national in scale, and was CEO there for a while, working on a lot
Yep.
of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives.
Uh, and it's also got to be something that is uh, there was a lot of emotion, I imagine, in
Yeah.
that role, that strong emotional component. Like, how do you manage something like that day to day?
Yeah. Oh, such a great question. And we could definitely spend a lot of time talking about self-care because this work
Yeah,
is really, really hard.
yeah.
Uh, I think what I found through a through line and several of those experiences I just managed with or mentioned is helping to create safe spaces for kids to heal and learn and grow, whether it's on the recess yard in at Playworks, whether it's in a rebuilt school, giving, what could have been a lost generation the opportunity to go back to kindergarten after a devastating natural disaster, whether it's a summer camp where kids that are experiencing the unthinkable with a parent battling cancer, giving them the opportunity to just be kids and to build connections with other kind of like-minded children that are experiencing the same things. So, um, I think centering children in the work is really important in staying
Mm,
grounded.
mhm,
And I also, what I loved about Kesem is it's a little bit of the Girl Scout model, right? It's like we had we had university chapters that basically launched their own business. They had to raise their own money to run the summer camp, build out
mm,
the programming and operations, find the camp, contract with all of the various entities, recruit children to participate in the camp, recruit volunteers to run it, and they ran many businesses. And I think that really resonated with me, like that youth leadership piece. And then, you just see the transformative impact of it. And I think that I've never been a leader that leads from the boardroom. I like to be in the field, interacting with participants that are involved with our programming so that I'm able to, I think, speak more authentically about the impact that we're having and bring that
Mm,
into the boardroom then. So I
right,
think staying close to the work has really helped me stay motivated in it because you could easily burn out in this work, right?
right, right.
So making sure that you have the opportunity to, I think, see and participate in it directly can be really important.
And so from Kesem,
Yeah.
how between then and now, how many,
Oh my gosh. I know. I
quite a
like
few?
lots of new challenges, right? I think I found my kind of sweet spot, a bit of a change leader. So when
Mm,
an organization has reached a certain point and it's looking to get to the next level, whether that's funding wise, programming wise, equity wise, whatever that might look like. So yeah, it's been a wild ride. And from Kesem, I then went to Yamba, Malawi, which such a cool experience. So, an organization that works in economic development, helping young teen mothers start and run their own businesses in ultra rural, ultra poor Malawi in order to better provide for their children and like break the cycle of childhood poverty.
mm,
So we were not only supporting livelihoods and cash assistance for these young moms, but we were also, of course, working in early childhood development with the children under 5 as well. So, nutrition and health and um, early education and all of those aspects as well. So the challenge that Yamba Malawi had was it was an organization doing that work and based in New York. And that
right.
felt incongruent to like the overarching mission of the organization. And so
Mm,
at Yamba, I led a decolonization process where, we looked at our leadership strategy and sitting in New York City in my apartment in Chelsea, I'm in no position to be making decisions for young teen mothers in Malawi about what types of businesses make the most sense or what challenges they might be facing. And so we really worked to localize leadership and shift all of our important decision-making processes and roles to Malawi. And so built up
mm.
our local leaders there. Um, and basically shut down our New York City office.
Oh,
There's
wow.
still, I think, one fundraiser that sits in the US that just kind of manages some of those processes. But it was a really incredible process to lead through and just
Yeah.
kind of like helping to reimagine what that could look like. And I think we're seeing a
Okay.
lot of that in international development. Hopefully it sticks. I know we're at an
There
interesting,
we're gonna get to
yeah.
that. Yeah. Okay. So where are you now? Tell us what you're up to now.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, yeah, now I am executive director of an organization called Children in Conflict.
Okay.
And very true to the name, we're focused on protecting, educating, and advocating for children in war zones. I have to say, it's the hardest, most urgent work I've ever done. Also, I think some of the most important. And yeah, again, I know we're going to get into the impact of some of the foreign aid cuts that are happening in the US and what that means, but I guess a little more about the work that we're currently doing. So we're working in 14 regions around the world. Everywhere you would expect, we're present. So anything from Syria to Sudan to DRC to Gaza and the West Bank. We have been working for decades in many of these areas. Some of these crises are just so protracted at this point. Uh,
Right.
what our education looks like, our programming is both formal and non-formal, helping children displaced by conflict, ensuring that they still have access to learning and skills and opportunities, even in crisis settings. So we have a really cool ed tech program where we use tablets and
Hmm.
gamified programming to help kids keep up and catch up in reading and math. And it's transformative to see it in action. So we're currently scaling that programming in Lebanon and Sudan and DRC, and Uganda. And it really just, we're trying to prevent entire generations from kind of missing out on education,
Wonderful.
which I know both agree. Here we are in academia, so we
Well,
clearly,
that also, well, it's interesting because it does dovetail into into the dissertation work and the inspiration for that work, right?
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Because another one of the areas that we focus on at Children in Conflict is mental health and trauma support. So, oh my gosh, like war takes a heavy psychological toll on
Sure,
children,
sure.
and our programs provide a lot of that psychosocial support, therapy. We do, we use play in order to help kids process trauma. So we create safe spaces where they can heal and rebuild resilience. Again, you're hearing common themes in my career, which has really been, what's been motivating me to do this work. And so we also help train local counselors and community members to provide trauma-informed care as well. Um, so yeah, absolutely. Like thinking about the environmental factors that are impacting kids and their ability to learn successfully and effectively is a big piece of what we do at Children in Conflict. And our partner organizations go by the name War Child. Um, and then the other piece we do is protection. So we run child protection programs that shield kids from child labor and trafficking and recruitment into armed groups. We work a lot around preventing child marriage and helping
Mm.
survivors of all of this reintegrate into their communities, which seems like it would be an easy given, but is not. We also do a lot
Yeah.
of reunification, children that have either lost family members, become separated you know, um, during fleeing from crises and such. And so we work a lot in that space too. So we're really busy.
Yes, right.
We're
And
really,
we've been talking around it. Let me just stop for a second and just say that for all those who have joined us, we do have Q&A. We do have a Q&A option for you if you want to send us a question through the Q&A button, if you will, or link. Please do so. I'm happy to take questions and share them with. I could call you Dr. McCall.
oh my
Dr.
gosh.
McCall. To share them with Dr. McCall, and we look forward to hearing from our guest today. Before we get to sort of the most recent developments, there's something that you said that I want to come back to. You mentioned not wanting to lead from the boardroom. Could you explain what that means to you?
Yeah, yeah. So, I think it's really important to, not just lead as a desk job, but to
Mm.
see the work firsthand. I've spent a lot of time in the countries where programs have been running or in the field if working domestically, meeting the children and families that are at the heart of the work. At Children in Conflict, I've sat with girls who have escaped child marriage and made it back to school. I've met former child soldiers who are rebuilding their
Mm.
lives. I've watched kids in refugee camps find moments of joy despite everything they've lost. When you can still see kids um, playing a circle game with a ball, surrounded by UN tents, it can be just incredibly both motivating, I won't say uplifting, motivating,
Yeah,
and encouraging because the programming is working.
right.
And so being able to, I think, bring those stories into board meetings or into, yeah, board meetings, policy meetings, fundraising pitches, um, because the work isn't about me, it's not about you, it's about them. And so I think being able to share their stories is really important. And oh my gosh, on a recent trip, I was just seeing the resilience of children. Again, the same children that are playing these games in refugee camps in you talk to them about their dreams and hopes for the future, and it's, they still want to be doctors and lawyers and teachers and nurses, and I just have this like overwhelming drive to make that happen for them, right? So
Mhm.
I think it's just such an important piece of the work. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to come to take this moment to again remind everybody that you're more than welcome to send us questions in the Q&A. I do see there's one already. So before we go to sort of today's developments, I do want to address this question because it's an interesting one. Nina asks, "It sounds like you're a master of pivoting in your career. How do you believe you got there, and what would your advice be to those who are early in their careers?"
Oh, that's a great question. I think that there are a lot of competencies that we learn in the classroom, skill sets. But there are those things like resilience and I know sometimes this word is a bit overused, but grit
Yeah.
and um, yeah, that just kind of allow us to work through and find solutions. And so I will say, as a nonprofit leader, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, Basil, like we never have enough resources. Like
Yeah.
always short on people, we're short on money. We have too many participants that need the programs that we're trying to provide. And so I think that we're kind of a little bit of, magicians or superheroes who have
Mhm.
to make these resources go even further. And so I think the ability to kind of think on your feet and to innovate and react in that way, our sector is a fantastic space to be if you want to be creative and
Yeah.
find solutions that really work. And so that's one of the things that I really love about this space as well.
Okay. So, I wanted to move into sort of where I really believe you could give us some good um, context, direction,
Oh
hope.
yeah,
Uh,
I don't know
because
about
there is
hope,
a
but I've
well,
got
no, no, well, we hope so. We hope so.
yeah, yeah,
There is a so we know that at the beginning of the Trump administration, it's been literally a month, and it's this first month has been a really long year because so much has
yeah,
happened.
exactly.
And one of the early decisions of the administration, which he sort of signaled even before the election, was that he was going to be making drastic cuts in
Yep.
government spending. And the first, it seeming, I believe, the first target for those cuts was USAID. One wonders why it was USAID, and we can go into our thoughts about that. Um,
Yeah,
but there's been a lot of conversation about the impact on the world when
yeah,
the U.S. decides that it is going to defund USAID. There was an article in the morning, which is comes out from the New York Times. And today, an article by Jeffrey Gettleman, who's an international correspondent, and it's talked about, and the title is "Losing Influence."
yeah,
And he starts by saying, I'll just for everybody who didn't read it, he starts by saying, foreign aid isn't just charity, it's power. That was the original idea behind the United States Agency for International Development, which JFK set up early in the 1960s to win the support of developing countries that might have otherwise drifted into the Soviet sphere. Elon Musk dismantled it in recent weeks. For now, most of its work has stopped and its worldwide staff has been called home. So it's clearly dramatic developments.
mm,
How do you see USAID in its value to America and Americans, its role in the world,
yeah.
and how does it affect the work that you've been doing?
Oh my gosh, this is a global crisis.
Mm,
The sky is falling.
mm,
Yeah, I mean, and thank you for sharing those sentiments. And I think also reminding us about the original intention of USAID, which, as you said, JFK set it up for not only, I think the kind of moral obligation that we feel as a world power, but also the soft power that it provides us. And so like you said, basically we woke up and every major humanitarian program in the US, it's kind of like shut off overnight. And that's basically what happened. We know that I think about 600, they're saying, employees will be retained of the 10,000. And that's not including the tens of thousands of employees at, international nonprofits around the world that are also feeling the cuts and the impact of this. Uh, I will say we do know that there have been some waivers mentioned in terms of life-saving aid that will still be funded, things like medical care and food aid. But as someone working directly in the field, we haven't seen that. No one is getting money right now. It's completely shut off. So that's unfortunate. I think it's interesting. I was reading some other a recent poll that said the average American thinks over 10% of the US budget is spent on foreign aid when it's actually less than 1%. And we've even seen people like Mitch McConnell, and we've seen Marco Rubio comment on the return on investment in diplomacy over defense, is so much greater for a cheaper amount, you get the same results, right? And so it's really interesting. But what we're seeing, so as I mentioned, children in conflict and war child, we work in this kind of space where we're providing education, protection, psychosocial support, which not included under this current waiver system. But what we're seeing is the entire aid system is collapsing, right? We can't educate children if they're hungry or they're injured or they don't have, if they're cold and don't have clothing or a home. And so we're seeing this just collapsing around us, which is really destabilizing regions. It's destabilizing the sector. We have almost 500 million children living in and around conflict zones right now. And so we fortunately are not feeling the impact that greatly. We've only have about 3% of our budget comes from US government funding, including some State Department grants. So we'll see about the impact there. I think there's a lot of uncertainty around how many UN agencies will be impacted. I don't think that's been like completely unpacked. So if other groups that work in the humanitarian space like UNHCR or OSHA will also have to then, trickle down some cuts as well. So I think we're waiting to see what those consequences could be. So fortunately, like war child and children in conflict were fairly financially resilient, but we are just so worried about the sector. We're worried about what we're seeing in the field. Places like, Sudan, facing the largest famine in the history of the world, is now has suspended food aid, right? We've got hospitals in Gaza that have run out of medical supplies, refugee camps in Syria that are bracing for winter and have, no aid. I'm sure people have been seeing in the news about HIV and AIDS clinics in sub-Saharan Africa are closing and cutting off in the middle of life-saving treatment, right? Other things like Uganda shutting down Ebola screenings. What will that mean? Raising the risk of outbreaks. And child protection programs, we're seeing them collapsing. More kids are at the risk of trafficking, forced labor, recruitment into armed conflict groups. So we know that women and children are the most impacted by all of this. And then,
No, you mentioned a couple of points that I
yeah,
actually want to reinforce because they're mentioned in this article the impacts of U.S. aid halt in its first week. In its first week,
yeah,
you mentioned Sudan. Most of the soup kitchens that feed 816,000 people in Khartoum were shut down. In the Ukraine, providers of maternal care vaccinations and firewood suspended operations. In Thailand, patients were told to leave U.S.-funded refugee hospitals. In Syria, a security contractor nearly halted operations at a camp that holds ISIS members. In Uganda, aid workers say about 40 newborns contracted HIV per day when funding for treatment stopped. And in the Ivory Coast, a program collecting sensitive intelligence on Al-Qaeda-related incidents was interrupted. So yes, this has some real
yeah,
implications for the rest of the world, I do want
Yeah.
to I want to ask you a sensitive question, because there may be some people who believe, perhaps not no one on this call, but
Mhm.
there are some people that believe, and I guess folks that were perhaps behind the cuts and the decisions about this in the first place, that say um, why are we doing all of this work around the world? We should be
Right.
spending this money internally on ourselves.
Yeah.
And that B, is this money or is this support, um, spreading America's influence in the world where it shouldn't be, if that makes sense, sort of continuing the sort of imperialistic or colonialist, this sort of view of or reach
Right.
of America. But given what you see around the world,
Yeah.
how do you respond to those points?
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I'll start with what I see as the easier question. People are arguing USAID is bloated and ineffective. Why keep funding it, right? Could USAID improve? Sure, sure, of course. But shutting down 1,000 programs overnight doesn't fix inefficiencies. It creates crises, right? So, USAID over the decades has delivered real results. Millions lifted out of poverty, entire disease outbreaks prevented, war-torn economies rebuilt. And so, again, I think there's been a little bit of sensationalization around some of the programming and how much money we spend on foreign aid. Again, foreign aid is less than 1% of the US budget. And the second point that you were alluding to, cutting aid doesn't solve domestic issues. It creates more global instability, more displacement, and really more security threats. And so investing in stability abroad is actually good business sense for the US because it reduces the need for really costly military interventions later. And I guess just to speak a little more to that, even if you put aside the morality, like, do we have a moral responsibility to do this work because we have the resources? It's also about US national security and geopolitical power. What I've seen in my decades working in the global South, when we step back, there are others filling the gap. So China and Russia are already filling the void. China is expanding its Belt and Road Initiative, using humanitarian aid as a tool to gain influence. Russia is leveraging food aid in Syria to grow alliances. And so we're really losing ground as a global leader. And unfortunately, terrorist and extremist groups thrive in these conditions. Groups like ISIS use humanitarian aid as a recruitment tool, and we're seeing it firsthand. They offer food and medical care and protection in exchange for loyalty. So when the US pulls out, these groups step in, and this, pulling out just makes America weaker. And so USAID was a real key tool of our soft power, helping to stabilize regions before they become full-blown security threats. And I think in that article you mentioned, Basil, Kenya is like a great success story, right? It's become a bit of an economic powerhouse in Africa. It's an ally. It imports US goods. And, now we're kind of abandoning this role that we've had, leaving a vacuum for others to fill. And that really worries me.
Well, it's interesting that and thank you for raising that, because as someone who spends a lot of time in the Caribbean, my family's from Jamaica, and you know, there are a lot of Chinese companies that are building infrastructure in the Caribbean and port cities in Africa, right?
Yep. Yep.
And so it's a big political issue in those specific countries. But to your point, if the U.S. isn't showing leadership and engaging in this work, it does open the door for others to fill the void, right? We've got a
Hmm.
couple of really good questions. Lindsay has a great question.
Hope I have the
Um,
answer.
and it's long, so bear with me. Avoiding mission drift. Is there a
Mm.
way to partner war, child, and educational NPOs with food and health NPOs how would you go about creating and sustaining these partnerships after this administration? The Disaster Philanthropy Playbook and SAMHSA indicate that education is also directly correlated to mental health and well-being. So that's a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great question. And I think what we're seeing from the sector in general, and look, the collapse of USAID is actually perhaps a spotlight on the need for creating more sustainability in some of our programs, right? So more localization, more uplifting of local partners to be able to do the work as well. And so that has been part of our new 10-year vision at War Child. We recently just went through a bit of a global restructuring in the sense that we've consolidated all of our country programs, the programming that we run in conflict zones, into one organization where it was being run a little piecemeal from different kind of fundraising markets around the world. And so it's just allowing us to be more effective and efficient. But so, yeah, and even USAID over the last year or two has come out with a huge localization agenda in order to, again, help enable local partners to do more of the work and making sure that the dollars that are being funded are getting to them as well. So that is a huge priority for the work that we're doing. And in terms of like education, I would argue that education is life-saving, right? I would put it in the life-saving bucket. But yeah, not quite being considered that under the kind of USAID programming agenda, but lots of partnerships in order to make sure that, yeah, we're not duplicating efforts. And again, our work requires that because of the areas we're working in, which are so vulnerable, and the participants also require food, and they require housing, and they require medical care. And so we need to make sure that those systems and other organizations are able to provide those services. And so a lot of what we do is built on partnerships. And we're starting to see, I think, more effective kind of coalition building in countries where we're working. In Uganda, we recently joined a coalition of local organizations that are all serving children through various different programming. And it'll just allow, I think, the sector to become more effective in how it's utilizing the limited resources we have.
Okay. Now we're getting I think that answer sparked a lot of other questions. So we'll get to everybody. So we're not quite at the lightning round yet, but we'll get to everybody's. There is a question from that says, kind of curious about Xiang Wu. I hope I didn't pronounce your name incorrectly, and apologies if I did. Anybody's name, my apologies if I pronounced it incorrectly. But Xiang writes, kind of curious about how nonprofits can effectively communicate to the public. So put your comms hat on. That a government funding freeze like the one impacting Columbia University and our bosses undermine global philanthropy efforts that save lives and promote stability worldwide. So how do you communicate these challenges and the urgency, I guess, around all of it?
Yeah, such a great question, and something that we've been taking on. I think we're seeing, unfortunately, some misinformation. We could argue from both sides, right? And a lot of sensationalization. I am not sure, like, we could talk about the example of the Gaza condoms grant, if anybody
right.
read about that, right? So, millions and millions of dollars were reported to have been spent purchasing condoms for Gaza. As it turned out, yes, some money had been spent, but it was spent in the Gaza province of Mozambique on family planning initiatives. And so it's like this kind of convoluted way of reporting that has, I think really been done to kind of rile people up about some of this. And so unfortunately, we're just in such a divisive time. And, I think that even if you don't agree ideologically with some of the spending of USAID, there have been, there was another instance of funding a opera in Colombia with a
Mm,
transgender character, which we all know helps to kind of normalize LGBTQ conversations in a society where rights are being denied, right? So like us on this call are probably already in the camp of kind of understanding what the underlying goal of that program could be. But even if you don't agree from an ideological perspective about some of the spending of USAID, it's hard to deny the impact on just like general human life and people
mm,
staying alive. So
mm,
I think we are just trying to be very factual and accurate in our communications, and not, you know, we're trying to kind of remove sensitive language and emotion from some of it, and present exactly what's happening and what we're seeing. And so we've done a little bit of work on social media. We put together an explainer that we put on our website as well. And, we've things that like as a communications professional, you might not consider, but things that, as a student of this sector, you would probably all appreciate, that I've had to go to bat with some of my colleagues globally around are, some of the language. And, we've been very intentional to say US government foreign aid funding. We've been very intentional to differentiate between USAID and US foreign aid funding because
mm.
US aid is a broader umbrella than just USAID, of course. And
Yeah,
so making sure that we're using really accurate language and that we're being specific. Like we're not saying the USA is cutting help for, people in poor regions of the world. We're saying the US government. And so it's important, I think, to have specificity in that in order to not alienate current supporters that are American donors and citizens that don't necessarily support the direction of the
right,
administration. And so we
right,
actually lived through a lot of that in other regions as well. So you can imagine communications around Israel and Gaza have been very tense, as well as, Iran and Yemen and Syria, basically everywhere we work. So
right,
it's
right.
been really interesting to navigate that. But again, being very accurate, very specific, sharing exactly what we're seeing from real firsthand experiences. And then the other way that we're participating in the conversation right now is through a lot of closed door meetings with elected officials. And so recently, Congresswoman Jacobs from California introduced a bill to try to save USAID. She is a previous USAID staff member. She also worked at UNICEF, so she's seen the impact of the work on the ground. And so I was just meeting with her office yesterday, talking about how can we help, how can we lend our voice, and yeah, a lot of it is education. And unfortunately, I think that like we're mostly going to see people voting on the party lines, for fear of retaliation from the
Yeah,
administration. So we
yeah,
also, I think, Oxfam has been very vocal. So if you're interested in kind of seeing how their take on all of this, they've been very specific, slightly inflammatory, but they're out there really campaigning for USAID reinstatement. I would say that surprisingly, not surprisingly, people like UNICEF, people like Save the Children, World Vision, Child Fund, a little quieter. And I think that many of us are a bit afraid of that risk of retaliation from the administration.
that, yeah,
However,
that chilling effect is
yeah.
real. Yeah, yeah.
But we also
Um,
have a moral obligation to be a voice for children that don't have a voice. So
right.
that's where we are now.
So, speaking of where we are now, we are in the lightning round section of our conversation. So, I'll get to, so I want to get through all of these questions. I'll read the question, just, we'll stay tight on the answers and make sure we get to these last couple. This is from Anne Marie. Dr. McCall, my undergrad is from Montclair State University. Go Redhawks. Is that the Redhawks? I think that's the Redhawks. Was in child advocacy and policy. At this time, I'm in development management. How did your higher and continued education benefit and prepare you for the positions you've had? Do you think that the experience alone would have been sufficient?
That's a fantastic question. And I've found a lot of benefit from classroom learning around theory. So change theory, leadership theory, organizing theory. And so agree that experience in the field is incredibly valuable. But I found that the mix of both have allowed me to be really kind of successful and effective in my work.
I'll just the moderator's privilege here. When I got my master's degree many moons ago, I worked full time and went to school full time. And I would never recommend anybody do that, but I would tell you that having both of those paths were really, those experiences were really helpful in my overall career. Thank you, Emery. Ben Murphy. Ben, are you an alum, SPS Nonprofit Management 21? Thank you so much for joining us. We'll have you on next time. Many nonprofits within the U.S. are bracing for the uncertainty of anticipated Medicaid, HUD, et cetera, cuts from an organizational management perspective. What have you learned from the USAID collapse that might help us prepare our organizations? Any insight on what contingency discussions U.S. nonprofits should be having now?
Yeah, I think that's, my gosh, such a great question. I'm glad that you're thinking ahead. Talk to donors. I mean, we have been, it's the cut in resources that are really impacting people. And so I think opening up communication channels immediately with all of your other funders, institutions, individuals. I think we've yet to see if like a real just general public campaign would be effective, but go to people that are already fans and supporters of yours and get them ready to participate in the larger conversation.
Yeah, and just a follow up to that, I mean, this is even having those conversations, you've got to give people the real understanding, I guess, that this is a long-term thing. This is not like we just got to get over this couple of months, right?
Yeah. You can't just dismantle all the infrastructure and then like turn the faucet back on, right?
Right. This is a long-term. You got to start thinking really long-term here. Kimberly has a question, and you touched on this a little bit at the beginning, but what strategies have you found most effective in inspiring and motivating your team, especially during this challenging time?
Yeah, I think that you made such an excellent point because we work in a sector where the kind of carrots for participating in this work are fewer than in the private sector. And so as a leader, if I don't have a lot of fancy titling and a lot of money to pay people, it's got to be by building really great culture, connection, community, offering people professional development opportunities and kind of nurturing and creating that. And I think the other thing that it took me 10 years to learn it, and I still sometimes have a hard time using this muscle, but being vulnerable with teams. And we need to band together, like it's going to take all of us to do this work. Things like that can be effective and kind of, I think, keeping people bonded together and motivated. But
last two questions. Grace has asked, you mentioned many challenges facing nonprofit organizations. How do you see them overcoming these challenges? Specifically, how do you quantify success of your organization in these times? Because you mentioned seeing some of the children on the ground. Is there a way you can elaborate on that?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, what does success look like? That's yeah, I
You
think
know
it's,
what? I'm going to add a little point because in the
yeah.
Make-A-Wish conversation we had a month ago, somebody asked, do you measure or how do you measure joy as a KPI? So maybe maybe that's
Mm,
kind of goes together, right? Like, what are your measures of success, particularly in this environment, given the challenges?
right, right. Is it, yeah, is it lives saved? Is it the quality of life provided? Is it, yeah, there's a lot of different, I think, KPIs to look at for us at War Child and Children in Conflict. I think it's, we're serving over 1 million children a year and making sure that we can continue to do that work and that the systems that the other organizations that we depend on in order for children to be set up for better futures, better and brighter futures, don't collapse around us. And so that's, yeah.
Yeah. Well, finally, from Kania, excuse me if I mispronounced the name. Very simple question. Is Children of Conflict looking for any volunteers? Which then speaks to the bigger question, how does anyone get to come and help you do your work?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. We need as many supporters as possible right now. And I think it's up to all of us in this sector to make some noise. Contact your Congress people, let them know what's happening, that you care, that this is important. And I think that's one of the biggest ways that we're hoping people can support in this kind of what I think is going to be a pretty long fight.
Okay. Yeah, we planning for the future is a big part of what we need to be able to do now, is that question alluded to. How do we prepare ourselves and gird ourselves for what will be a long, extensive, emotionally draining fight
Yeah.
ahead? But the work on the other side is the benefit. It is what we do it for, right?
Yeah.
Dr. Kimberly A. McCall, thank you so much for your time today. What a great discussion. You do some amazing work. We are really glad, excited to have you as a faculty member doing this work with our students, training them to go out there in the world and not just, I always say, when people say, I want to be like you, it's like, no, be better than me. And I think that's what we're doing. We're training the next generation to go out and take over for us, right?
Mm.
And that's important. And thank you so very much for all that attended with us today. We do this monthly, so come back. We have an actual really cool event for our March lunch and learn. It's actually not actually a lunch and learn, but it is an event that we're starting in the evening. You'll get information about this. It's with the Dance Theater of Harlem, and we're going to focus on nonprofits in the arts, particularly in this moment in time. But you'll hear from an extraordinary organization with incredible legacy, both in Harlem, in New York, and around the world, about the work that they do, about their founder, about how they train the next generation of artists and dancers, and what they're doing in this particular moment to make sure that they see it through, as we say. So you'll get more information about that from us. But remember, we do this monthly, so we look forward to having you engage with us even longer and with more opportunities. So again, Dr. McCall, thank you so much. What are you teaching, by the way?
I'm teaching capstone this summer, so
All
I
right.
hope to see some of you there. And then I also teach various communications courses and just general sector impact and scope. So
All right.
much to talk about.
Well, thank you for your thought leadership, Dr. McCall. Thanks again. And for everybody that joined us today, thank you so much and have a great rest of your week and weekend.
Go buy your Girl Scout cookies. I think it's season.
Oh, shortbread. Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
everyone.
Bye-bye.